If you want to learn how to make a web API that is connected to an Azure SQL server, then stick around. Here we're in the Azure portal. You have to make sure that you have a subscription and a resource group. First thing we'll do is we will make a database server, and then within the database server, we will add a database. These are showing at the top because I have recently used them, but you can use the search bar and look for SQL servers, just the regular one here. And this will create a server in which we can have many databases installed. So I will click create. You need to choose your subscription and your resource group. Give the server a name. It will have to be unique so that no other person has the same name as you. So if I would do something like test, that's most likely already taken. So I'm going to call this one Tech Art Room. And down here, it's probably easiest to use just SQL authentication. When you give it a name, you need to come up with a username that is not reserved. So you can't use things like SA or root or something like that. So I'm going to call mine DB admin. And right here you see the list of ones you're not allowed. You can't have DBO, guest. I'm pretty sure you cannot have SA. Yeah, SA root admin administrator. Okay, come up with a password. Next you can go to the networking. Next to your security, keep all the default values. I am not going to start any free trials. I'm not going to put any tags in. And then I'm going to click create. This will take a couple minutes to actually create it. And once it's created, you'll see it over here. And now we need to add a database. So we can do it one of two ways. We can either go to SQL databases, and if you don't see it, you can search for it at the top. All right. And since I only have one server, I'm actually going to go back to servers, so it'll make my database within this server. So I'm just going to click the server I just made right there, and I'm going to click create database. Okay. To do this in the cheap tier, it should cost around $4.53 of your either free credits or budget. Down here, you need to give it a name. I'm going to call this database GOBS, and I'm going to keep it on development. And then down here, you'll see these three radio buttons. Every so often, there's a bug in this, and these radio buttons don't show. And I end up having to just refresh the page or play around with it until they do show, because this is a required field. I'm going to pick locally redundant backup storage just because it would be the cheapest. Right here, add current IP address. You can do that if you want. I'll show you how to do it manually in a second. Okay. Security, don't start any free trials. I'm going to leave the defaults as is. Same thing here. I'm going to leave the defaults, no tags, and then I'm going to click create. And again, we'll have to wait a little bit for that thing to be created. So on this page, we see that we have a database server right here that has been created, and right now it's in process of making a database. You will want to download a SQL Server Management Studio, abbreviated SSMS, and you can see in a search it's the first one that comes up. So download this program, and this is your client program to manage databases. When a SQL Server Management Studio comes up, it will probably show a screen something like this. And what we want to do is go and grab the server name from the page that we were just on. So we want to go to SQL databases and go and grab the name of this server. Okay. And it's right here. Mine is techartroom.database.windows.net. So I'm just going to copy this. I will paste it right here. And remember, we chose SQL Server Authentication, so choose that one. And for this part, my username was dbadmin, and then use the password that you created. Okay, we'll make this. And you'll see right here that I get a message saying that my IP address is not valid and it is denying my public access to this database. So this is what I was talking about that I'll show you how to do this. So we want to go back into Microsoft Azure. Okay. We want to be in SQL servers, and then we want to scroll down and look for networking right here. And right here, we want to look at this public access, and it basically says that we have no public access available to this. Therefore, I get this error message that comes up. So what we want to do is select the network we're on. And so just click this selected networks, and then you can add a firewall rule, and it will automatically figure out what your IP address is. So if you want to just click this button right here, you can go ahead and do that, and it will just add your IP address. Do not forget to click save at the bottom. Once we do that, it makes a rule. And periodically, you might have to come back to this page and add your IP address if it ever changes, and maybe delete your old one. Okay, you can also add a range of addresses as well. So we come back here, I click OK, and then I'm going to try to connect again. And I spelled my username wrong too. So there we go. So we'll click this, and now it logs in just fine. Over here on the left, we will see our databases. Okay, and this is an empty database with no tables in it. I'm going to go ahead and make a new table, and here we can pick the column IDs. So I'm going to call the first one ID. I'm going to give it a type, and the type I'm going to pick for this one is varchar, and I'm going to change that 50 to a 36. A GUID is 32 characters, and there's 4 dashes in them usually. I'm not going to allow nulls, and I'm also going to make this my primary key by clicking the primary key button up there at the top. So I will call this first name, and I'll make this 50, no nulls, and I'll make a last name as well. And when you click the X on this table, it will ask you to name it and save it. So I will call this people. Next thing I'm going to do is make a new project. In this case, I'm going to make a WebAPI project. So I will search for API, and I'm going to make this ASP.NET Core Web API. I'm just going to call it Web API, and I'm going to call my solution GOBS. You can choose your .NET version. I'm going to choose .NET 7, and right now I am not going to put any authentication into this Web API. Okay, now in production we would want to do that. And again, by default, we're going to get a weather forecast service that is stubbed out for us, and we can see that working just fine there. So next, what we want to do is we want to configure our database. Now, since I'm using Microsoft Visual Studio for Windows, I can, if you use Visual Studio for Mac, it does not let you add the server, but that's okay. You can still do the work. This is just kind of a nice extra to have. So you can click View, and you can click Server Explorer. And basically, we can kind of have the option to work either in SQL Server Management Studio, and or we can work with it right in Visual Studio. So what I'll do, I show the Server Explorer window under View here. So what we want to do is actually come over here and right-click Data Connections and hit Add Connection. And this kind of lets us connect as a client, just like we did in Management Studio here. Okay, so I will paste this server name in there. Remember, the authentication is SQL Server Authentication. Put in your username and password. Okay, if you give it a second, it will kind of try to connect in the background here and populate this pull down menu right there. If it can't connect, this window or this list box will not show anything. You can also just click test connection if you want. Then it says, well, what database you want to connect to, and we only have one there so far. So I'll click OK, And then right here, we can also see our database as well. And it gives you some kind of rudimentary tools, not quite as extensive as what you have in Management Studio though. But you can certainly just, show the data and run some queries and things like that. Okay, I know I don't have any data yet, right? But I can see that my tables still do show okay. And for now, just to practice putting some data in, I'm just going to GUID generator just so I don't have to do it in code. And I'm creating a GUID that does have dashes, and you can basically just, generate a GUID here and use this one, and you can try adding in a record, and of course it should work fine. And we could go back to here to Management Studio, and we could refresh right here to see our tables, right? And we can go here and see the data that's in here, and we see our record even over here, right? And if we want to just do some editing over here, we could just edit, not select, the top rows, right? Let me go grab another GUID. So I will grab a new one here, and I will go ahead and put a record in here, and that record committed fine, right? And just to show you that everything is in sync, I could come here and refresh this even in Visual Studio, and I should see the change there. Okay, so this tool's okay, it's handy right there. Now what we want to do is be able to map one of these people records in a database into an object. So to do this, we need to use a couple of libraries, and we're going to use Entity Framework. And what Entity Framework does is it allows us to map database records into strongly typed objects. So I'm going to go to my NuGet packages under Tools. You can go to the NuGet Package Manager and just click this middle one, right? And you can browse. We may as well install Newtonsoft JSON because pretty much every project uses it. And then we're looking for Entity Framework. Okay, and we're going to install this core. Let's see if that's the right version. Okay, this needs .NET 8, so I don't want to use that version. I'm using .NET 7, right? So I want to maybe push this version down. And let's see, that one's okay. Let's see what 8 uses here. That one requires 8. So I'm going to go to this one, .NET 7, because it only requires .NET 6 or higher. Okay, so I will install this one. Next, I'm going to install these Entity Framework tools. This gives us some nice tools for scaffolding, mostly. That's what I use it for. And again, look at the dependencies right here. We can see it requires .NET 8, so I don't want that version. I'm going to go down to this one, 7.015, and install this one. And the last one, I'm going to use this Entity Framework Core SQL Server. And again, just take a look at the dependencies and make sure you pick a version that is compatible with the .NET version you're targeting. So I'll click this, install. All right, the next thing that we're going to want to do is set up something called a user secrets file, and what it does is allow us to put things in like connection strings to our database where it'll have the username and password. This is okay for small development purposes, but in larger production applications you would probably want to do something more secure. But for now, I'm just going to right click on my WebAPI project, and I'm going to find user secrets right here. So the user secret file should look something like this. So just replace these values in your default connection. Okay, so make sure you change your server name, your database name, your ID, your password, and then the other stuff can look exactly like it is here. And for security purpose, this is a file that should generally not be checked into a repo. Now what I want to do is create a strongly typed object for my people table. And my people table has an ID, a first name and last name. So I'm going to open up a console window or terminal window. I'm just going to go to View and click Terminal. And here I get a little shell script down here. And I need to install a tool first from the command line. So it's .NET tool install -- global .NET -EF, and then whatever version you're using. I'm using version 7, and we get a little message saying it was installed correctly, and again, you only have to do that one time. So what I'll do next is ask it to scaffold out me some strongly typed classes here. And you're going to want to go into the directory where your project is located. So right now I'm at the solution level, so I'm going to go into my project here. Okay, so after we scaffold this out with this command, we have .NET EF DB context scaffold, and then we have our connection strings here. We're using this default connection, and -o models is just the folder that we want to put it in. Otherwise, it just puts it in the root there. If you put a table name, it will scaffold only that table. If you don't put anything, it will scaffold all the tables. Okay. And if it already exists, it gives an error. And what you can do if you want to recreate, you can put the -- force in there. All right, so this time we're going to try to make a WebAPI controller. So you can right click on controllers and click add, then controller. Make sure you go to API. By default, it just always brings you into this viewable page here. So we want to go to API and click this middle one. It's an API controller with create, read, update, and delete. And it uses entity framework, which is what we're using. And it's pretty simple. Just give it the model class that you created -person. And the context, we only have one to pick from, and you name your controller, it'll be called people controller. Okay, and right here, it seems like it does not know about my connection. Okay, so to fix this error about the connection string and things like that, it ultimately comes down to our program not knowing about the context that we created. So we have this context over here that is a mapping into our database, and then we have each individual strongly typed class. So to fix this, what you can do is go to the file program.cs, and what you want to do is add the context here under this builder area. So we want to go and write builder.services.add context. Add DB context. And then you can just put the name of the context here, the class name, gobs context like this. And what I do, I would build this as is just to make sure it works. And then we can try adding this controller again. So right click controllers, click add controller, and make sure you're on API and select the middle one here and choose the model class, which is person. We'll make people controller, and what this does, it makes a controller called people, which basically gives us CRUD functions into our database table. So we can run this and we can test it in Swagger, and this get should get all of the people. So you can click try it out. It makes a call. You notice it takes a little bit longer because it needs to go talk to that database in the cloud. But we see our examples, people that we made right here. All right, so we can get a specific person. Let's take this ID number, and I can do post. I'm sorry, I don't want this one. I want the specific person right here, right? So it would be this URL, right? And then we can just paste it in here and do an execute, and it will get that specific one, right? And you could also just test it directly in a browser if you wanted to. We can see that the JSON is indeed returned. Next we have a post. So here we would have to make a brand new one. So if you don't want your client coming up with GUIDs, you might want to make the controller figure out this GUID or ignore it or make another model that doesn't pass an ID, whatever. But I'll just put one in for now. I'm going to just borrow this other one, and then I'll just change a number at the end. I'll turn this 7.5 to a 7.6, right? And we will post this one, okay? And we get back a 200, which is good, okay? So let's go ahead and see if that one was added, right? And we can see that Henry is now in here, so that's good, right? Now we can do an edit, and some people actually use posts for both editing and deleting, but this follows the traditional pattern. Okay, so we do need to have an ID of one to edit, so we need to go get one. So I'll edit this Henry guy right here, and we'll put his ID right here. Again, you might want to put logic in the back end that ignores the ID, but I'll just put this as new first name. I'll put this as new last name, and then this will be called new phone, and you'll be able to see that it's changed. Okay, so we'll go and we'll get them all again. So we'll run that, and we can see it's okay right here. And then finally we can do a delete. I would still need an ID, so I will delete this guy that's new first name and new last name. So here's a delete. So I'll delete this guy, right? We'll go back up to here and we'll see if he's gone. And you can see now we only have 2 people in there, right? So what about editing the controller? Well, maybe in a post, when we're adding a new person, we want to make sure that we pretty much ignore the ID that is passed in, and we'll come up with a new one. So we could do that, right? So we get a new GUID here. Instead of adding this person directly, right, what can we do? We can say, well, person.id equals our new ID, right? And we can just discard whatever they put there, okay? And then we can save. This should not conflict. If it does, it would be an extremely rare case, okay? But we'll go ahead and we will try this again, okay, with a post. Okay, so what I'll do, I will put something in here. I will make up an ID here. I'll put a person's name here and the phone number there, and it should pretty much ignore that. I can step through the code, put a breakpoint there. Okay, I put a breakpoint there. I will now hit this post. We can see here, it gets in here. We can see the ID that I sent in, right? And so what we do, we just go ahead and change the ID of this guy passed in, and then we just simply call an add. Okay, so we add it to our context, and then we do and then we save changes. Okay, and so we're now dealing with this data layer here, just called a context, right? So we can add to it and then save. We can edit it and then we can save. We can go get one. We would not need to save it in that case. Okay, and then right here we can do a delete right here. So we're going to find this one, we're going to remove it, and then we're going to call save. And this was where you would put your logic in to make rules about editing records in the database. Of course, we can go look over here in SQL Server Management Studio. And let me refresh this, and we'll go ahead and just do view the records. And this should represent what we had in our database as the latest values. And then just for convenience, if you want, you can also just look in your Server Explorer, and you can go and take a look at the data there as well. I'll just refresh it because this has a phone number now. And what we'll do, you can just do a query if you want, or you can just view data. So if you're comfortable with SQL, right, you can just do this if you'd like and run queries. Just do debugging.